Hello, hello. Recently I made a large frame. I made it out of cherry, but I was a little bit tight on material. So up at the top, I wanted it to have this flared end. Since I didn't have enough material to cut that out of one board, so let me show you how I did that. So after cutting some parts to rough length, I milled everything. I found a couple of pieces that had this angular grain, and I knew that would work. So I simply removed the mill marks from the planer or joiner with a hand plane. This will ensure a super beautiful, nice, tight glue joint. And here you can see that bottom piece didn't have the grain quite the way I wanted it, but this is going to get stained dark, and I assumed that it would work. All right, so I have this chunk of cherry. I know this is not very pretty, but you can see I've added these pieces, one on each end. And the reason I'm doing that is I'm gonna create this upsweep here on, at the bottom and on the top. It'll be wider here than it is here, so I had to add that. You can see the grains running at an angle, so it'll kind of blend with this direction. And yes, you'll probably see a glue line here, transition, but this is for me, it's going in my own house, so it won't matter. And it really is gonna be way up high and not visible. Now, there are a couple of schools of thought when it comes to table saw fences, and I wanted to show you maybe the primary differences between the Bismarck style and the Unifence style. And I've used both. I like them both. They both have, pros and cons. A really fantastic attribute or characteristic of the Unifence is that you can remove it, maybe, and lay it over this direction. And now with that, of course, I need to get this chunk of wood the same plane as this other piece. And I can easily do that. This was cut wider intentionally, so when I was gluing it on there, I wouldn't end up being too narrow. And there's not any glue at this area, so that'll ride against the fence beautifully there. And I can set the blade distance with this plane and clean all that up. So with that part cut, nice and flush, I can flip it around and cut the other side. So yeah, the Unifence has some really awesome features, but unfortunately they don't even make this fence anymore. But I love it when I'm, say for instance, using a cross-cut sled or maybe the miter gauge to cut short pieces off a length. You can move the fence back and you don't get pieces trapped between the blade and the fence. And you can see here where I routed that thumbnail profile on as much of this part that I could. The rest will have to be done by hand. Of course, the amazing bandsaw is a good choice here, and then we need to smooth that curve. And here I have these curved belt sander platens. Found one that fits pretty well, and a lot of times I will size my projects to fit these, already made curved belt sander platens. So the belt sander that I love is the Makita 9401, and originally it had these screws that retained a plate, and I can use those to attach this curved belt sander platen. And in the description, I'll leave a YouTube link with more information on how I make these. It's an incredibly useful jig, fixture, curved platen, whatever you want to call it. I use them all the time. All right, here we go. So this bandsaw cut is pretty rough. So I start with, I'm assuming that was about 100 grit. Makes sense to me. Looks like it's tracking a little off. Easy to adjust. There you go. And with 100 grit, I can just get most of those saw marks out. I know I have to come back with finer grit, so I'm not getting all of them out, just the majority of them. And it looks like I got them all out. Looks like I decided to use a scraper instead of a finer grit, and that's fine too. And as I was editing this video, I thought, dang, Ramon, that scraper should have been sharpened. But it's doing okay. And essentially, I'm just trying to get a smooth transition between that flared piece and the main piece. And since there's a really extreme acute angle, a lot of that glue joint can easily show up. So at this point, I didn't even know how this was going to work. I like trying stuff. And then here with a different belt sander with a flat platen and a smoother grit, I can blend that transition. And that's not too bad. And it's going to be way up high, about 7 or 8 feet up. So I thought, yeah, I'm happy with that. And here you can see the thumbnail router bit that I used to create that thumbnail profile on some of the other parts, and I also used it on the majority of this piece with the exception of the flared ends. The flared ends have to be shaped by hand, so I just start by marking that. I love using a scribe for applications like this. I can just gauge that right where I want and make a mark top and bottom. And I suppose that hand plane is a good tool of choice here. Maybe a spoke shaver would also work. And this little Veritas low angle plane is probably my most used hand plane. Super versatile in the shop. Love this little dude. And I can just sneak up to that line, mimicking the curve that was created with the router bit, of course. And it flares at the end, so that radius has to change. A little tricky. So I'm a bit of a ambidextrous. When I was in, I don't know, kindergarten or whatever, my teacher used to actually smack my left hand with a ruler, with a yardstick, and it's a right-handed world. Had a meeting with my mom and my teacher, and they coerced me to change. Didn't really stick, but yeah, it's good to use tools with both hands. This thing may need sharpened, and we put a hook or burr, turn a hook or a burr, the same way as if it was straight. And I recently had a YouTube video titled The Incredible Card Scraper, so yeah, go check that out. In this video, I share a couple of key points that I've never seen in a YouTube video, so yeah, maybe that'll help someone out there. Alright, so this is going to cut a lot better, and I'm going to slow the video down to normal here in a bit so you can hear something. Haha, you can hear that, right? It sounds rough. It sounds wrong. So essentially I was going against the grain, and it's still cutting, but it'll be smoother turning the scraper around. It's interesting to note that the straight part of this component, that area has a shorter radius, right? A sharper curve. And conversely, on the end, that area is a bigger radius. And so you really have to take your time to blend those two areas and create a smooth transition. Okay, once I get it how I think I want it, I'll bring it outside and I can create this low angle raking light, right? By just rotating it. I can see any little flaw, a little bit of a scratch there. Down here, there's a little bit of a ridge right in there and some scratches that needs feathered out. A few scratches on the ends, not really clean, right there in the corner. All that really shows up out here in the strong sunlight. And then I can check this end, make sure that's a nice, true radius, nice and consistent at least. And this side I noticed it was not. It has a bit of a point there, so I need to feather that a little bit. Of course, these ends I haven't sanded those. I actually forgot. But I'll get those sanded and then just keep checking this with the sunlight. And now I'm gonna go kill 2 dogs. So this is another component that's also curved, and you can see you always want to feed, in the direction of the belt sander. So here you can see that direction would be wrong. It would want to grab that material and fling it back. So you're always feeding in the direction of the belt. Yeah. And so since one edge has that thumbnail profile, it would want to roll on me, but I can simply grab another scrap piece of wood, lock those together, and that helps hold it in the correct position. And as you probably already know, sanding end grain in cherry, it tends to burn. Even with a brand new 100 or 120 grit belt, it tends to burn. I believe, if I remember right, it has a higher sugar content. So I'll just simply sand this by hand and work up through the grits. And when a project is going to get stained, I always sand the end grain to a higher grit. Since it's very porous, end grain tends to absorb that stain and darken more than the adjacent surfaces. And so by sanding the end grain with a higher grit, this eliminates that problem. And of course, the proverbial low raking light to find any flaws. And a great way to sand a thumbnail profile is to initially sand in some angular direction. You can see I have pencil marks so I don't go past that transition. We're getting there. It's blending nicely. That's looking good, yeah? I then ease or break all those corners with 320 grit. All right, so here's that addition. And you can see it is completely visible. So this is grain. That's a grain line. You can see it's right there, but here's that transition. And interesting, it shows up on camera in the video, but it doesn't when you're just looking at it. And here's the transition at the top. Completely blended perfectly, and you don't even see the glue transition. That's fantastic. Here's another shot from the front. And if you did not know that was there, you would not know that is there.
Although I do see some small scratches.
You can just barely see that transition. You can see the grain change here, but that's the seam. So by hitting that with a hand plane and making that a really good quality tight joint, it virtually disappeared. And I think this side looks even better. Let's see if that'll focus. There we go. Cool, yeah.
There you have it. So welcome to our home. Come on in. And I made two of these marquetry motifs. One was a barn door. This one, it was actually a mistake and turned into this wall hanging. My lady absolutely loves it. The thumbnail profile came out great, and I believe Lima, I call her Lima Peru, I believe she approves. So yeah, you may have seen the original motif that was a barn door. It came out beautiful and perfect. This one was the first rendition, and it was a mistake. Mistake, hyphenate the word, take one, take two, as many takes as it takes, right? I ended up repairing it, and I'll show that in another video. It was actually a pretty cool process, and I learned a lot, and it turned into this wall hanging for my lovely lady. Anyway, thanks a ton for watching. Enjoy a spectacular day.